Lesson 6, Testing Excel. In this lesson, you will learn how to steer Microsoft Excel sheets. To do this, you will use the Excel standard modules from the aidpack.tce. All Excel steering using these modules will take place in the background, non-UI, and must follow a few standard steps. First, you will have to open the workbook. The Excel Open Workbook module will be used. Here, you will enter the workbook path. This can be an existing workbook or a new workbook. The ID of the workbook. Each workbook needs a unique ID. If the user does not assign an ID to a workbook, Tosca uses the path of the workbook as its ID. When a workbook is loaded with a workbook ID that is already in use, the workbook that is currently open will be closed without saving. Whether you want to open the workbook in read-only mode or not, true or false. Whether you want to create this file new or not, true or false. You will then make this workbook the active workbook. You will do this by adding the module Excel Set Active Workbook. The only value that must be entered here is the ID name, which refers to the open workbook we want to set as active. If there are multiple worksheets available in the workbook, you must then select the active worksheet. This can be done using the Set Active Worksheet module. You will need to enter the actual name of the worksheet you want to set as active in the active workbook. This is case sensitive. You can select whether this is an existing worksheet or if it should be created newly by selecting either false or true, respectively, in the test step value, Create New. You can then use any of the other Excel modules to read, buffer, verify, delete, or modify data in the worksheet. Modules for this are Create Range, Set Active Range, Set Header, and Range Manipulation. Create Range is used to specify a range or an array of cells in the active worksheet. To do this, you will set the range ID. This is the ID by which you will refer to this range to reuse it during the test case. You will then specify which cells are included in the range. To begin, you will specify the Start Cell row to indicate the first row of the range and the Start Cell column to indicate the first column of the range. You will then specify the End Cell row, which is the last row number of your range, and the End Cell column, which is the final column for your range. The syntax for the row or column number is the pound symbol or hashtag followed by the row or column number. When a range is created, it will be automatically set as the active range. The action mode for all steps is Input. Set Active Range sets a specified range as the active range according to its ID, so any of the range IDs created during the test case can be referenced to switch between ranges. The required action mode is Input. Set Header specifies a header row in the currently active range. Here, you will use the action mode Input and the syntax hashtag or pound symbol followed by the row number. Range manipulation is the step that allows you to steer or perform actions on the active cells you have specified. This module uses classic engine table steering. The range being steered is the active range. Each cell that needs to be steered using this module will require a separate test step, as classic modules can only steer one cell at a time and perform one action at a time. For this reason, the action mode must be set on the range table itself. This will tell Tosca which action mode to use for the cell being steered in this test step. The test step values below this will be used to steer one cell, row, or column. To steer another cell or to perform a second action, you will need to create another test step. The action test step value will be used in Excel sheets when you want to buffer a value. The action test step value is the name of the buffer you want to create and will be used with the action mode buffer on the range test step value. For buffering, you will need to specify the row and column required to find the value you want Tosca to buffer. The value can be left empty. To use the other action modes, for example, input to enter data or verify to verify data, you can skip the test step value action. You will need to specify the cell which contains the value you want to steer using the row and column number or name. Rows and columns can either be identified numerically using the row number or column number, or by entering a string, cell identification. A hash key may be entered as a prefix if rows should be identified by their row number. The value cell will contain the data to be input or verified. There is one additional action mode in classic test steps which you have not used before, called output. This is used to read a value from the system under test, which is then logged into the used value column in the execution list section. No other action is performed on this cell. The used value can be logged for all action modes. To show the logged values used for all test steps, you will have to enable this in Settings, Engine, Logging Options. Once you are done with the workbook, you can use the standard module Close Workbook. You will need to enter the ID of the workbook to be closed and select whether you want the file to be saved or not. This is set to false by default, so you will have to change it to true if you want your changes to be saved.